to the wider Discarnate internet world, and it's a live stream hangout. We'll be here an hour talking about extremely important things. For the last couple of weeks, I've been talking about our upcoming summit. You can see the logo down on the lower right-hand side. It's called Truth Over Fear. It's happening this weekend. Now, it's 25 speakers. You're never going to hear on MSNBC. Wolf Blitzer will not be talking about these people except to mock them. They're PhDs, MDs, professors of medicine, attorneys, journalists, all talking about the massive CCP virus from several different angles. And it's free to register. You can upgrade once you get inside. Go to restoretheculture.com, restoretheculture.com. Okay, to our topic. I first met our guest, Michael Anton, through his writing. He did a piece in 2016 using I was going to say a nom de plume, maybe it was a nom de guerre. It was called the Flight 93 election. He has a new book on this coming election, which is called The Stakes, America at the Point of No Return. And I'm delighted to have him on the live stream. He's a lecturer and research fellow at the Hillsdale College, Washington, D.C. campus, a senior fellow at the Claremont Institute, and former national security official in the Trump administration. Mike Anton, welcome to the show. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Where do I start? Let me start with, this is not the old school 1960s, 70s era Democrats arguing with Republicans America, as Rush Limbaugh said this week. This is a whole new knife fight level of political disagreement at this point.
Yeah, I just want to clarify one thing, which is to say it's an election book, but it's not an election book. Now, I'm self-interested in saying that because the election's in a week, and I want people to keep buying the book after the election's over. But it really is an attempt to do something bigger than that, to say what kind of regime do we actually live in right now? How is the U.S. governed, and where are they taking this? So the old trading back and forth between the parties and making compromises, and I get some of what I want, but I have to give you some of what you want, has become impossible, if not, or close to impossible. I think because the Democrats and the left got to the point where they thought they were on the cusp of permanent one-party rule, the way they are in California and New York and other states. I think they thought they were getting that, that Obama's reelect had cemented it in a way, and that 2016 was a foregone conclusion. And then it turned out not to be foregone. And they were shocked, not just that they lost, but that they lost to someone, the left as much vitriol and hatred that as they poured on Romney and McCain and George W. Bush, on some level knew that these were standard issue politicians that basically accepted the framework of globalization and neoliberalism and open borders and trade giveaways and constabulatory wars in every part of the world that has become the dominant paradigm of American policy at home and abroad. Trump comes along. He's the first of either party really to just reject it wholesale. Bernie Sanders, you could say maybe, but to the extent to which Bernie just gave in to the Democratic Party, this year, I think, reasonably calls into question his commitment to being a real outsider. So Trump struck them as an existential threat, and they did everything they can to prevent him from governing. And it still seems like he might win a second term. I'm kind of knocking on, I don't know that this is actually wood, but it's like some kind
knock
of
on Formica.
Cheap wood substitute. It looks like wood. I think he could very well win this election. I think even if he does, he'll still have a very difficult second term. In a way, maybe more difficult than the first term, but in other ways, probably better than the first term. It won't solve our problems, that's for sure. That victory alone. But I think losing guarantees we're going to have a lot of other problems. So it's better to win right now than to lose, even if winning isn't a panacea.
You wrote an essay recently that got my attention called The Coming Coup, C-O-U-P. And it's a sobering read. And by the way, it's a great note about your book. It's not an election book. It's not going to go obsolete on November 4th. But I think it is a slice. It's a window onto our era at the change-up of the old way of doing politics that had to do with rhetorical device and argumentation and being persuasive to open advocacy of violence. I, as a conservative, I'm a practicing Catholic. I want to debate with anyone. I care about truth. Truth is not left or right. It's above that model, that paradigm. But the left, as opposed to classic liberals, the left want the right deleted, gone. sayonara.
Well, not delete it, though. I would put it this way. A fairly nominally Catholic writer who took last rites, but I would have to say in the actual things that he wrote, we would have to put him outside the pale of the teaching of the church. Niccolo Machiavelli says in chapter 9 of The Prince, he says that in every city or in every political community, there are two diverse humors. The great who wish to command and oppress the people, and the people who wish to be neither commanded nor oppressed. I don't think the left they want to delete the right as a political force. They want to delete the right as opposition that they have to deal with. But they don't want to get rid of red people or red states or red communities. They want to rule us. That's what they want. They want to boss us around, tell us what to do, and essentially be able to enjoy, in a way, the fruits of our labor. That is to say, the taxation that arises from that, the production of grimy things that bankers and photo sharing app coders on the coasts can't do. They don't know how to grow food. They don't know how to produce energy, but they consume all this stuff. And they know somewhere in their hearts that it's Hicks and Rubes and deplorable people in the heartland who do this. And we sort of need them, but we despise them. And so the answer is not to get rid of them. It's to rule them. That's what I think they really want. That's what I think they thought they were getting in 2016, the final resolution of the political problem. That the two Americas, which had diverged, they weren't going to break apart, but one was going to be forever the senior partner in the big chair giving orders, and the other was going to be subordinate. And the 2016 election upset that.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying if they're deleted, there's fewer others to rule over.
There's fewer others to rule over, but also I think that two things motivate the left on this question. One is a kind of desire for revenge, but it's a peculiar desire for revenge. That is to say, if 2020 brought this out in full clarity. If you followed, I spent a lot of time in academia. I am now an academic, which means I have academic training. So I've been on university campuses a lot. Mm-hmm. I first arrived on a university campus to live and study in 1987. I remember quite clearly that spirit of revenge that America and history is nothing but a collection of grievances of your group wronging my group. Therefore, justice requires I redress those wrongs. And I thought, everybody thought at the time, this is terrible, but hey, it's confined to campus, so who cares? It's not going to. It won't affect the rest of the world. So there's that, but there's also a kind of Grand Inquisitor spirit. Right now, I'm not meaning to insult the church here. I'm Catholic myself, but if we think back to what is the Spanish Inquisition about, and I can quote Machiavelli again. His term for this is pious cruelty. Pious cruelty. In other words, when I punish you, I think I'm helping you. Right? I'm making you better. Your soul is out of joint. You think the wrong thing. You do the wrong thing. You're probably going to go to hell. Therefore, you need correction from me, even if you think you don't want it, and even if it feels unpleasant. I think that's the way the left views the right. We will make you better through the application of punishment, right? We're helping your soul, your malevolent soul. And then the final point, which I already sort of made, is I think intuitively they know none of us knows how to grow anything. I mean, organic vegetable gardens aside, like the mundane aspects that keep society going can blue coastal enclaves in university towns do that? I think my own opinion is they can't, but I think they kind of deep down know that. Like, what would happen if all of a sudden the United States of America was just the Acela Corridor and Highway 101 up the West Coast, and that's all it really was, and a few little dots here and there. And I think they sort of know that's not going to work. Yeah.
Thomas Madden is the guy on the Inquisition. He points out that it was really it was an exercise of the state more than it was the church. But I think it's a fair analogy. And I think there's something in play with this COVID-19 now. You have in Canada a request for a proposal from the Prime Minister's office that when asked about it on the floor of the Ontario legislature, MPP Randy Hillier had his question ignored, and then the Speaker of the House cut his mic and told him to sit down. These are quarantine detention camps, and we're not even allowed to ask who's going to go in these camps. The re-elected Prime Minister of New Zealand, Mrs. Ardern, said quite gleefully, oh yeah, there'll be facilities for people who don't want to take the coming vaccine. It depends on how long they want to stay there. It's for their own good because they care about, health and security.
And this is one of the issues I raise in the book. I actually don't know the answer to the question. It may well provoke a reaction. people don't. If Machiavelli is right, that the definition of the people is they wish to be neither commanded nor oppressed. If you command and oppress them, you could You could provoke a reaction. I mean, what is the American Revolution? The founding act of our country, but a reaction to being commanded and oppressed. If that spirit is still alive in the people, I'd like to think the American people, if they're told you have to. Now, I'm not anti-vax myself. Call me a squish or whatever. I tend to think these things are good, but I also wouldn't want to use state power to force it on people. And I certainly think it would be a monstrous injustice to say you're going to be relocated to some camp until you go along. If the people don't rise up and fight that, something in the spirit of America will have been lost.
Yeah.
Or that will be evidence that it's already maybe lost.
Right. And that's the tipping point. That's the no return thing. By the way, the forced vaccine is coming. This is not a show I can put this in, but folks who are interested, just Google the name Alan Dershowitz forced vaccines. He says the police have the state's power to inject you, pull your arm up and stick you with the needle. But what do you think is the status of when we say the American people today, as we're doing this in 2020, is that fighting spirit of 1776? Is the minority of Americans who think that way, has it reached a critical point, or do you think the lemming spirit has taken over?
I don't know. I definitely can say with confidence we're not in the same fighting trim that we were as I use the we broadly since my ancestors were not here in 1776, but I don't think we have quite the vigor that we had in 1776 or in 1946 for that matter. But there are signs of fighting spirit. I mean, look, first of all, the Trump election itself was a sign of health. Yeah. The people had been propagandized endlessly and told that this was an evil man who would start a nuclear war and also a buffoon who would wreck the country and get absolutely everything wrong. I mean, the level of scolding, cajoling propaganda was at decibels never before heard. And 63, whatever it was, million people just said no, voted for him. That's a sign of health. Protests that we see, anti-lockdown protests, when states pass outrageous gun legislation and they provoke a response, those are signs of health. Maybe not enough, but that they demonstrate or at least suggest that some level of the spirit is still there. And maybe they suggest that, I'll quote a line that I've been quoting often lately from the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence recognizes that we're about to take a momentous step. And it says men are inclined to suffer evils while evils are sufferable. In other words, a people can recognize X is bad and Y is bad and still take it because, you know what, I still have my life, my family, my house, my job. I don't want to rock the boat too much, and I don't know what's on the other side of my reacting. Yeah. So I will accept it while evils are sufferable. But there comes a point perhaps when evils are no longer sufferable and the reaction is provoked. And I don't know exactly what that point is or will be, and I don't know whether it will provoke a reaction, but I don't think we can take for granted yet that the American people have become, as you said, lemmings or have lost all of that spirit. I see signs that they still have it.
Well, I hope you're right. I interviewed Robert Riley, whose fine book, America on Trial, is a very good, it's just a wonderful read. And he comes down on the side of America is not screwed, it is salvageable. But there's work to be done. I'm in California, so I live under our dear leader, thank you, Governor Gavin Newsom, who's already laid down behavioral protocols for families in their homes for an event a month from now, namely Thanksgiving, and 2 months from now, namely Christmas.
Yeah. I'm a native Californian. In fact, my whole ancestry going back well over 100 years, I've been in California. And I'm the first in my family, at least among my blood relatives, to ever leave. And I always thought I would go back. And now I'm fairly convinced I'm never going back, unless something dramatic changes, which I don't expect to happen. Honestly, I wonder, nothing personal. I wonder, I say this to dear friends of mine too, who are there, like, why are any of you still there? You need to just accept it.
Yeah, we're all having the same conversation, and many friends are doing the Califexit dance. Newsom actually wants to pass a bill punishing California expats, so to speak, with a 10-year California state tax penalty.
Now, I saw that. I didn't think it was Newsom. I thought it was some crank in the state legislature. And I believe, not that this matters because we don't respect the rule of law in this country much anymore, but if in a country that did respect the rule of law, that would be blatantly unconstitutional and be struck down 9-0 by the Supreme Court. But hey, it's 2020, anything's possible.
Right. Yeah. I used to live in the belly of the beast, Los Angeles, and the joke among Angelinos is Angelinos are both the inmates and the wardens of the prison. You don't have to stay, guys,
Yeah.
So we left. Cryptocracy is a word I learned from your book. I never heard it before. Am I mispronouncing it?
Or critarchy, yeah. It just means the rule of judges.
Critarchy, the rule of judges.
I didn't invent it. I borrowed it. Other people came up with it. There's, archy, rule, or archon, the root. Mm-hmm. You sort of slap anything in front of that. That's where we get democracy, aristocracy, and so on.
Yeah.
Critarchy just means the rule of judges, and it's my term, or not, it's others' term that I borrowed for the way judges exercise legislative and executive power under the color and cover of judicial robes. So it is, there is no law that says we must ban X or we must require Y. I will say that I have found it in a penumbra of the Constitution and decree it from the bench. It's things like that. Or it's an example of the use of executive power by judges is the consent decree, where somebody says, a private citizen or a pressure group says, I find situation X intolerable and I sue. And the judge says, okay, institution Y, who was sued over practice X, I am now laying down a consent decree. A school district, you must spend a certain amount of money and change your policies in all of these ways before I will lift this decree. In the meantime, the judge's rule effectively governs. He's exercising executive power. So those are the two chief ways that judges rule us. Now, go ahead.
You mentioned Griswold versus Connecticut as a notable kind of first round of this fight example of that. I wrote a book on contraception, and I focus on the right to privacy, which doesn't exist except as a penumbra. So when you said the word penumbra, I thought about that.
It's an argument that I was a college freshman during the Bork nomination.
Oh, okay.
And Bork had criticized Griswold versus Connecticut, but on very careful grounds. In other words, he didn't even take a position on whether he was for the law or against the law. What he said was the decision invents a right that is not in the Constitution in order to make a legislative decision. And in other words, the state had passed a law. If the state wanted to repeal the law, there's measures to do that. The legislature gets together and say, we're going to repeal this law. They didn't do that. They relied on an extra legislative process to invalidate the democratically enacted will of the people. And of course, Bork was excoriated for that. He was right. And he was also right that precedent then becomes baked into the law and becomes the basis for all kinds of other critarchic decisions, above all, the most important being, of course, Roe versus Wade in 1973.
Which used the right to privacy as a fulcrum to do the same thing, writ abortive.
Right. Yeah. Regarding the word penumbra, I like to repeat this wherever I can. I've actually never been in there, in Justice Thomas's chambers, so I can't confirm this as an eyewitness account. But I have been told by more than one person that there is a sign on the wall of his chambers in the Supreme Court that says, "Thank you for not emanating penumbras."
That's great. Even if it's apocryphal, I hope that's true.
That's I hope good. It is too. I don't. If it's not, I don't want to know.
Tell me about the law. I don't know if it was sponsored by, but certainly supported by, may he rest in peace, Ted Kennedy in 1965 on immigration, and the solemn, straight-faced assurances that there would be nothing untoward would happen. He even mentions ethnically mixed cities will not happen, which is an odd. Nowadays that would be attacked as unspeakable.
After a generation and a half or two generations of very, very high levels of immigration after the Civil War, which included I will admit, included my ancestors. So I have no DNA in me that traces itself to the, Anglo stock, whatever, anybody who was here before the so-called Ellis Island wave. They all came. And this wave was a huge demographic transformation of the U.S. and a giant population boost. Now, you could say, and a lot of people did say at the time, that America needed the people in the sense that the country was expanding widely. You know, the frontier, while formally declared closed by the federal government, I forgot what year, sometime in the 1880s, but it was still the Western, maybe 2/3 of the United States was still underpopulated, and you had a gigantic industrial economic boom that could not arguably have achieved the level of growth and capacity that it did without a lot of additional people, without a lot of additional people from abroad. In other words, natural population increase could not have achieved what the United States achieved in the so-called robber baron era of the Industrial Revolution and explosive growth. So what happens is World War I, people forget, a lot of people remember the 1924 Immigration Act. What they forget is that was essentially ratifying a status quo that had been in place for 10 years because the immigration flow stops abruptly or is cut to a trickle by the advent of World War I. Because in those days, everybody's coming on ocean liners. They're coming in steerage at the bowels of big ships. The ships stopped sailing for the most part in 1914 because of World War I, with a few exceptions. Obviously, the Lusitania is an exception. But the immigrant traffic, which was massive before that and a big profit center for the shipping countries, stops. It doesn't restart after the war, and then Congress enacts a pause with the 1924 Immigration Act, which doesn't say we're not taking any more immigrants, but it dramatically reduces the levels that had been in place before that. So really from 1914 to 1965, about 50 years, the American population is taking in a small number of immigrants and remains stable. The 65 Immigration Act opens the gates again. And changes the 24 Act imposed quotas based on the percentages that a given country had contributed to the population by a certain date. And so this lifts the quotas, it changes the quota system, and it opens the gates. Now, to what end, right? It's hard to say that the 1965 Act was necessitated by anything like the Industrial Revolution of the late 19th century, when you'd had the greatest demographic bulge in the country, the so-called baby boom, beginning right after World War II, through right up to this year, 1965. It's not like, in big business or anybody could say, golly, we're underpopulated and we need more people. But this law is passed. And I think it was passed in part out of the same spirit that passed the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which, the 1964 Civil Rights Act arises in large part, maybe primarily, because America has a guilty conscience, deservedly has a guilty conscience over the way it's treated part of its citizenry. So thou shalt not discriminate, maybe the way one summarizes the Civil Rights Act. I think that same spirit then informs the 65 Immigration Act. Well, if we're not going to discriminate here at home, how can we discriminate against foreigners, essentially? And there becomes, Robert Kennedy says this, I quote him in the book. Robert Kennedy at one point, who was also not just Teddy, remember Bobby was a senator too that year from New York, says something like, I wish I remembered the quote clearly or accurately, I don't, but something like, if civil rights mean anything at home, then it has to mean something abroad. And essentially the United States has an obligation to take in people who want to come here because civil rights are human rights. Now that is an entirely conventional wisdom on the center left and among neoliberal oligarchs and among many Republicans today. It's like, how dare we say that, we limit immigration? As if we're not a sovereign people that get to decide these things for ourselves on whatever basis we want to. We could simply say, this is my position, for instance, America at 330 million is big. We don't need more people right now. We've got a lot of domestic problems that we need to solve. We have declining life expectancies in certain populations, stagnant or falling wages, healthcare problems, all kinds of problems that we need to address right now before we start thinking about addressing maybe very genuine problems of foreign populations. But in any event, we have the right to say as a sovereign people exactly who and how many people we want to take in, if any. And that's not conventional wisdom today. Conventional wisdom on all of the left, nearly all, if not all of the center, and a great deal of the right is, no, if we try to say no to anyone, we're discriminating, and discrimination is evil. Therefore, if you follow this logic to its conclusion, it is, we have an obligation to take in the entire world if they want to come here. I mean, there's a book out right now, I hope it's not selling better than mine, literally called 1 Billion Americans. Right? We're at 330 right now. We'll see what the 2020 census finds. It might be more, but it's not going to be a whole lot more. So you're literally talking about tripling the size of the American population, according to this book. And this is a very popular idea in a lot of places. But I don't know anyone, aside from the author of that book, if he's serious, who actually thinks that this country with 1 billion people will be a better place to live for the people who already live here.
And objecting to it is rebranded as xenophobia or worse.
Yeah.
It's almost like an unconscious judicial balance that the country tried to attain in 1965 because the ground had already been softened to popularize and make the contraception mentality just the default setting of the culture, which means fewer Americans being born. Then boom, 7 years later, 1973, Roe v. Wade starts, even fewer Americans existing. So you have to have some equilibrium.
I point this out in my book that people, one of the arguments one constantly hears for more immigration is, well, birth rates are low. And so if we don't replace Americans, first of all, just to say replace means you're a conspiracy theorist, unless you're saying it as a positive. Then it's this is another theme of the book. I coined a term. It hasn't caught on. Maybe it's a little too fussy, but I call it the celebration parallax, which is the same fact pattern is either laudable and glorious or deplorable, depending on who says it and what they think about it. So if a leftist says, we need to replace lazy, dumb Americans who don't have enough babies with vibrant foreigners who will work harder, that's beautiful. If I say, wait a minute, you're trying to replace us, then that's a conspiracy theory. That's called the Great Replacement, and it's a conspiracy theory. It's both good and not happening at the same time, depending on who said it.
That's right.
So they definitely, to which I have said on the specific question of demographic decline, well, wait a minute, couldn't we look at maybe reversing some of the anti-family policies that we've been having in place for the last 50 years? Couldn't we do what I know these countries, to say their name, they're like Voldemort, but I'm going to say them anyway. Like Russia and Hungary and Israel, that one's not Voldemort, but Russia and Hungary to the left definitely are. They have raised their birth rates in recent years by pursuing policies that specifically encourage family formation. Couldn't we try that rather than saying, we give up. Let's just import foreigners.
Yeah, the Quebec government's doing the same thing. Quebec and Ireland had the largest birth rates on earth in the 1920s. Now they both have really, really low birth rates. So there's their tax incentives. There's a conception day in a certain part of Russia. It's like, guys, isn't the old-fashioned motivation to want to have sex sufficient? No, you have to give cash prizes, apparently. The good news is the answer is, go ahead.
I wouldn't knock what works. That is to say, if a tax credit, people have pursued various policies. Well, we'll give them a tax credit. Or, if you have a fourth kid, the president of the country will come and pay you a personal visit. Some of these things get really ham-fisted.
Yeah, they definitely work.
They might be a little cringe, but if they're effective, I'm not sure I care.
I'm not even saying it's wrong to do that. I'm just noting that the old-fashioned motivation used to be plenty sufficient. The late, great Bishop Sheen has a book called Old Errors, New Labels, and there's a chapter on birth control, and it's called Making of the Stork a Bootlegger. So let's transition now to the ironically Orwellian named Transition Integrity Project, TIP, their leaked report from August 3rd, 2020. What is the Transition Integrity Report, and who's Nils Gilman?
So he was, I think, executive director or one of the senior people. I had no idea who he was until he threatened to kill me on Twitter and then denied having threatened it, but refused to take the tweet down. So he compared me to a Nazi. That's nothing new. The left compares everyone they don't like to a Nazi. But he compared me to a Nazi who got executed by fire. Not actually a Nazi. He was a French collaborator with the Nazis who was executed by firing squad simply for having written articles. No treason was proved. And the phrase used was intellectual crimes. This tweet is still up there. You can look at it. Nils Gilman says, I deserve to be shot without trial by firing squad for having written certain articles. He's proud of this. The Berggruen Institute, a well-funded think tank in LA for which he works, they're proud of it. Both the institutions for which I work, the Claremont Institute and Hillsdale College, have sent letters to them demanding an explanation be taken down. No response. People as prominent as Arianna Huffington and Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, a former president of Mexico, go look at the Berggruen Institute's board. It's a who's who of neoliberal oligarchs. They don't have a problem with this, which just shows the left, in the current environment, the left can get away with anything. They can openly incite violence on Twitter. Twitter will do nothing about it. Twitter, on the other hand, look at how it's censoring all kinds of legitimate revelations about Hunter Biden. I mean, I can't even begin to list all the ways that Twitter nickels and dimes and traffic cops the right, but it literally allows the left to incite violence, and it doesn't do anything about it. This is one of those things that eventually, if a pushback is going to come, will come, because the left will get somebody killed. And I just don't, it's hard to imagine the right essentially accepting a kind of permanent open season on them from the ambient culture and not saying, I have to do something.
This is certainly asymmetrical warfare. You would never, and I would now, I don't know anyone who would write a tweet like that.
No,
obviously.
And I know, look, let's say let's stipulate that we both know some hot-headed people who late at night, angry, might dash something off like that. I also know that all of their friends would say, dude, you went too far. You got to get rid of that. And I know that Twitter would censor them. I know that they're like, if I wrote a tweet like that, Hillsdale College would fire me. Simple as that. Yeah. They wouldn't wait. They would just say, you're gone. I might be able to beg to stay and make a groveling apology and be on probation for a while, but I would at a minimum get severely disciplined by Hillsdale College. Yeah. This guy, his employers, the Berggruen Institute and its ubermenschy neoliberal oligarchic board are A-okay with it. That's America 2020.
Deft use of ubermenschy.
Threaten violence against people they don't like, and the entire power structure says, A-okay.
I'm totally stealing ubermenschy, still, you know. A bunch of people have just joined. I want to say hello to folks who've joined the live stream. Also want to mention, if you've just joined us, our guest is Michael Anton. He's a researcher. What's your official title at the Washington campus?
Lecturer and researcher.
Lecturer and researcher.
I'm a college teacher. I'm a professor in all but name, and the reason I am not in name is because I didn't finish my PhD.
Gotcha. So you're a fellow. I'm just a fella.
Yeah, so, I'm a lecturer. I mean, a lecturer is what they call someone who teaches college courses but doesn't have a PhD. So I can't be formally on the faculty and get tenure and all of that.
Okay, understood. I just want to mention the restoretheculture.com. It's free and it's on the COVID-19 massive deception. Well, let me turn to some questions here. Got some people there. Yeah, the link there is. Yeah, I don't get that. So some Coffin Nation members are here. By the way, it's restoretheculture.com. I think I mentioned that. Hello, Mark Casanto, greetings from Ottawa Valley, Canada. Get to an actual question here. There's someone here from Adelaide, Australia. People from all over the world. Yvette Weilacher, just read the article by Mr. Anton, as if the pandemic wasn't bad enough. Holy Batman, do you really think the military rank and file would go along with a coup? Trump has done so much for the military and got us out and kept us out of foreign wars. That gets to the point.
Honestly, I doubt it. I doubt it, and that's a hopeful sign. One never knows until, you know, if they try it and then give an order or a whisper campaign and they try to get it going. We'll have to find out in the event, should the event come. But my gut tells me no, that if a bunch of rank and file soldiers get an order from their colonel or whatever, you're going to storm the White House to drag the president out, they're going to say, I'm not following that order. That's unconstitutional. This is wrong. I didn't take an oath to do that. I took an oath to protect and defend the United States of America, and I won't violate that oath, and I won't sully the institution of the U.S. Army, which, let's remember, predates the founding of the United States of America. The U.S. Army considers itself to have been founded in 1775, when there wasn't a United States of America. And, you know, I think it also would sully the legacy of the greatest American hero and one of the greatest heroes of human history, namely George Washington.
When you said 1975, I just helped my daughter do a massive project on the Cambodian genocide, and Pol Pot called 1975 year zero. So don't want to press the analogy too much. The Democrats, anti-Trump former Republicans, and others got together and gamed out various outcome possibilities with John Podesta playing Biden. And they sort of play acted what complete resistance to a Trump victory would look like.
Well, the scenario that got the most attention was basically a repeat of 2016. Clear electoral college victory for Trump, popular vote loss. And playing the Biden role, John Podesta, a Democratic insider, to say the least, a former Bill Clinton chief of staff and Hillary Clinton campaign chair, said, I refused to concede, and then tried to find ways to get Democratic governors in states that Trump won to not send Republican, but send Democratic electors to the Electoral College. That, to me, was striking. I mean, that was now he could say, and I'm sure he would say, well, I wasn't advocating this. I'm just saying, the stated rationale was Biden felt that he couldn't concede because his supporters wouldn't accept that. I actually think that's kind of true. That is the second half of that. I do think that a Trump victory, Biden supporters will not accept, and they will put pressure on the Democratic Party and on Biden to not accept it. The question is not what the Democrat on the street thinks or wants. The question is, will these people in power and in positions of influence and responsibility, will they do what they're required to do by the Constitution and hopefully by their own conscience, should that be operating properly at the moment, or will they go along with it either because they fear the street or because, hey, everybody who runs for president presumably wants to be president. Nobody likes to lose. Will they go along with it to say, hey, if this is the path in after I lost, well, then this is the path, so let's take the path. I hope not, but that, again, is going to be one of those things that, unfortunately, we're going to have to find out in the event.
True or false, Hillary Clinton said that Biden should not concede under any circumstances.
Google it. It's on, unless they've taken it down. It's on tape. I've seen replayed many times. She definitely said it.
All right. More folks here. Okay. A lot of people giving weather updates. Thank you. A lot of hellos. Any questions? Hellos we got. A lot of people from Massachusetts not happy either. Speaking of Massachusetts, you believe that as California, so the country, that California is sort of a think tank heaven on earth for the left.
Well, to a point, because California is still, in a sense, not progressive enough for the left because it's hobbled by being part of the United States of America, which has red states and therefore red senators and red congressmen and so on, and Mitch McConnell and all of these things that if we didn't have a filibuster and, states like Wyoming also having 2 senators, think of what we could have if we could sweep all of that aside. Yeah. So, California points the way, but it is not the destination for them.
Let me ask you, media.
Which is, imagine that. Just think that through for a second. You live there. You live in California. You know what it's like. Imagine imagine the mindset which thinks this place is too reactionary for me. Wow. Yeah, right. Somewhere along the line, and I think that somewhere was the Bush-Gore battle in '92. Yeah. Someone, I don't know if it was behind an oak-lined room and they had cigars and they decided together as an oligarch or as a true conspiracy, but someone flipped the color scheme of what this grand narrative is going to be described as. Oh no, I don't know exactly how it happened, but what had happened was after Bush v. Gore, USA Today published as a foldout, like an insert or something. It was a huge piece of paper of a county by county map, and all of the Gore counties were blue and all of the Bush counties were red.
Has to be deliberate, right?
I and everybody who believes for sure that they made that choice deliberate because they said if we make the Democratic counties red, it's going to associate it in everybody's mind with communism, and we can't possibly do that. Therefore, we have to do it this way. No question in my mind that that's why they did that. I mean, they could have just as well made it green and yellow. Like, why did it have to be blue and red? Orange and magenta, something. Right. That's true. Yeah. When I think blue, I think true blue. I think, blue suit. I think royalty, I think tradition. Red, of course, the association with communism. It's one of those things, though, that has become so a part of the culture. Because there's no getting around it anymore. So I use the terminology, semi-reluctantly, but, it would be pedantic to make the point and then try to say, well, I'm not accepting that, so I'm going to call Republicans blue and Democrats red. You're just confusing everybody at this point. It was a highly successful op, in a sense, propaganda op on their part, and we're stuck with it. Unfortunately.
Do you think that at this point, because we haven't seen any, except for Dr. Jill, no child of Joe Biden has hit the campaign trail as all of the Trump kids have. Do you think the Biden campaign is just imploding at this point? There's so much dirt now, so much smoke.
I really want to caution anybody against wishful thinking. I think they're not where they want to be. I think they thought that they were going to cruise to an easy victory, that he could stay in the basement, and that COVID and the economy and Trump's erratic nature, the way they see it, would carry them to victory. Just a few days ago, there was a story. I guess this was unconfirmed, but it was at least corroborated that they were putting on a lid. Now, Biden wasn't going to campaign. 9 days left. He wasn't going to campaign anywhere. I don't know that the Biden campaign ever affirmed that, but it sounded true. And there was a lack of a denial, at least for a while. Now he's out there. He's hitting the trail. And he's not only, he's realized, which I think suggests, if not desperation, certainly very deep concern on their part. We can't. The basement strategy isn't going to work necessarily. We're going to have to roll them out there with all the risk that entails. And they're going to states that I think they shouldn't have to worry about. Like, they're sending him to Minnesota. So I could understand going to Pennsylvania, which is tied, Florida, Michigan, Wisconsin, all states Trump won last time. Minnesota. Trump lost Minnesota last time. Granted, not by a great deal.
Yeah.
But according to the polling right now, Biden's ahead in Minnesota anywhere from 3 to 5 points. If he's going there, it means that they think it's at risk. So that's a hopeful sign, but imploding, I wouldn't take anything for granted, especially to the extent to which you have viewers and listeners who vote. I don't want anybody to go, this is in the bag. I can stay home Tuesday. No.
Yeah,
you need to go.
Yeah, I don't want anyone to conclude that, believe me.
Yeah, don't conclude that.
Yeah. A homeless guy who looked like he was a refugee from a ZZ Top video, looked a lot like Jack Dorsey, was in front of the Senate committee, was it yesterday? Just blandly burbling denials that there's any problem.
Jack Dorsey, look, can I say this without fear of libel? I don't know. We'll find out, I suppose. Jack Dorsey's just a bald-faced liar and an enemy of the American Republic, of conservatism, of the Republican Party, of red states, of human decency, of everything you can name. If we don't understand that, and I'm not giving Congress advice on how to treat him, but in our own minds, we have to conclude that the hood, the sort of Darth Maul look, he is adopting that from the purpose because he hates us and he wants to use his immense power to hurt us. And he does use it to hurt us every day. Jack Dorsey right now, to repeat, is letting a death threat against me stand, despite having many people complain about it, and despite him holding the right to vastly higher standards. So I have nothing kind to say about Jack Dorsey. Or Twitter, for that matter, which I would like to see go under.
Yeah, I left
up with federal power.
I left the pool of cess on September 8th. I have a show production thing just to blast out my stuff. But yeah, it just brings out the worst in humanity. And they shadow ban everyone, and they need to go. For folks who've never heard the phrase, what is the color revolution?
So the color revolution is the origin of the term, as far as I know, goes back to a series of events in 2004, 2005. So November 2004 to early 2005 in Ukraine, where a president appears to be elected who's, Ukraine is a very divided country, and we can roughly say into two parts: an eastern half that is friendly to Russia and a western half that wants to be free of Russian influence, roughly speaking. And a pro-Russian candidate gets elected, but it's a contested election. It's not clear. And what happens is, from that point, all the media operations, a lot of foreign influences flood the zone, in a sense, with anti-Russian and anti-candidate or anti-winner propaganda. Say he didn't win, or he's illegitimate, or he's a Putin stooge, or whatever. Fill the streets, general strike. It's an attempt either to overturn the results of an election, or to say that the election was not clearly resolved, and therefore we're going to use protests, general strikes, and things to resolve it, and change the political outcome. Now, it's called a color revolution because what happened was, as I recall, the opposition candidate, the sort of pro-Western candidate at that time, had adopted orange as a sort of campaign theme, and so everyone supporting him started wearing orange clothes, waving orange flags. That became known as the Orange Revolution. There have subsequently been other color revolutions, many of them identified by a particular color, many not. But it's this. If I were to boil it down, it is an attempt to change a government, either via a contested election or without an election, without the use of force necessarily, but with the use of overwhelming media influence and propaganda, street protests, general strikes and other kind of mass actions that make governing by the person in power impossible, and essentially forcing that person to step down.
You think that is not an improbability, that is on the table as something that could even if it's a quote unquote landslide numerically, if they do all these harvested ballots, and if more fraud that exposed by people like James O'Keefe happens, there's plausible?
Well, okay. Plausible that they want to do it, and that if they think there's an opportunity, they'll try it. Absolutely. Plausible that they can pull it off. I don't know. And that's another thing that will have to be tested in the event. There's no way to predict that in advance. It could easily fizzle, or they could surprise all of us and pull it off. We'll see.
Yeah, I think it's clear that their color will be pink, but that's another topic for another day. Okay. Let's see here, coming up on 10:02. Want to make sure we have questions. A lot of thanks, a lot of thanking you for the book, which reminds me, for I am completely negligent. Yeah, the book's called The Stakes, America at the Point of No Return. There it is right there. Not banned yet on Amazon. You haven't got the shellacking treatment?
No. I must not be important enough.
Did you get any it's always good to get a 1-star review from someone who hasn't read it.
I've got a few of those, yeah.
A new Medal of Honor, right. Let me ask you about how President Trump's demeanor changed in the last election. I think that was a welcome change up from a perception and from a strategic point of view. The debate with Biden, where he was there was just seemed like not a brand new guy in front of it, but he got a chance to have a lot of masks on Joe Biden, literally and figuratively drop, like his accidental attack on oil and all the states. That was a moment.
It reminds me of a famous Washington phrase. Michael Kinsley, who's not so famous anymore, but used to be very famous and had a Washington Post column. The phrase Kinsley gaffe refers to a column he wrote one time when he said the definition of gaffe is when a politician accidentally tells the truth or accidentally says what he really believes.
That's a great quote. I've heard it elsewhere, but I didn't know he also used it.
No, that definitely comes from Mike. So that was a classic Kinsley gaffe. I'm not even sure that is what Joe Biden actually believes. I mean, the old Joe Biden, the guy who claims to be, in touch with the common man, working class guy from Scranton, knows that Pennsylvania is very, very dependent on oil, gas, and other energy industries. I don't think the old Joe Biden would have believed that. I think that the new Joe Biden knows where the energy and the heart and soul of the Democratic Party is, where his base is, and he knows that that's what he has to say. And so he said it not because he believes it, but because he figures correctly that his base demands it of him.
Yeah. Calling God the thing. the thing, bless America. So I believe early in the book you talk about 3 different models, 3 different kinds of America. America as democracy, America as republic, and America as oligarchy. What's the dominant model now, and what do you think the next step is?
Oligarchy, pure and simple. I don't think we're a democracy or a republic in any decisive respect. We vote, but does voting actually change the direction of the government? On the margins, but not fundamentally. The election of Trump was the most consequential, at least it was, let me put it this way, the election of Trump was the biggest repudiation of the current course the country had been on, at least since 1980, and probably since long before that. And it has not had the consequences that it should have had, not because of Trump, per se, although I do think he's made some mistakes. He's made some bad personnel judgments. I think his decision to cooperate with McConnell and Paul Ryan early on was ill-advised. I think he should have kept running against them and sort of jammed his populist program through without them. But okay, that said, the problems are, I would lay the feet at the difficulties Trump has had in getting his program through less at his own feet than at the extraordinary resistance he's encountered from the entire rest of not just the government, but every power center in U.S. society, which really goes to show you that we're not a democracy or a republic. The power doesn't decisively reside with the people or with the vote. or with all of the places that it's supposed to reside, according to what I call the parchment. It resides in these concentrated power centers, banking and finance, corporate C-suites, Fortune 500 C-suites, universities, foundations, and above all, the administrative state, the fourth branch of government grafted onto the executive branch, which rules without accountability, and which rules by diktat.
How much do you think the successful nomination of Judge Amy Coney Barrett was a fuel injector for Trump?
It'll help the same way I think Kavanaugh helped him, and Kavanaugh probably picked the Republicans up 2 or maybe even 3 Senate seats in 2018. It will help. I just think conservatives can't rely on the courts. The fundamental nature, the structure of the courts of critarchy doesn't favor conservative ends; it favors liberal ends structurally. But also, how many times do we have to go through the same experience of getting all our hopes invested in a justice only to watch them put down some otherwise inexplicable ruling that seems like a betrayal of the principles that they, I mean, we just saw it happen this summer more than once. So never, he or she who investeth too much of their hopes in the courts will always be disappointed, in my opinion. Like, at least if you're a conservative. If you're a liberal, you'll be disappointed sometimes, but you're going to be encouraged more often than you're going to be discouraged.
Yeah, I think more conservative hearts are broken. We've got the pro-life. It goes back to the Reagan era to me. He gives us Sandra Day O'Connor, who is a stalwart non-originalist pro-choice, Thomas Alito, Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, Roberts. I'm missing some.
I mean, the worst of all was Souter. I think that was the biggest betrayal.
Yeah, I think so.
Souter. Thomas and Scalia were the most faithful to, and Bork would have been had he been able to get on.
Bork would have been, yeah. It's funny, interesting, isn't it? Bork dominated many news cycles back then. It was everywhere.
I think that's one of the reasons that they went all out for Bork, is that they realized that this guy he's not corruptible. He's not going to change. And he was also just so unbelievably smart. I mean, read his writings. Go back and read his book on the law in the Supreme Court called The Tempting of America, which I read in college. It's mind-blowing how good it is. And I think, he had such a paper trail. This is the phrase they use, this long paper trail of law review writings, academic writings, judicial opinions from his time on the D.C. Circuit. It was just clear he outclassed everybody, almost everybody, in terms of sheer intellect, and would have been such a force on the court that they knew this guy is extremely dangerous and we got to take him out.
Smarter than the question askers.
Oh, by far. I didn't appreciate it at the time. I was too young. By the time the Thomas hearings rolled around in 91, I watched them and I understood what they were about. But if you go back and watch the Bork hearings now, it's like watching an Einstein argue with a kindergartner in almost every case of the questioning by the senators. He's just... You wonder how he had so much patience for these people.
Am I remembering correctly that there was a big to-do about the fact that he, in his past, smoked weed?
No, not at all. So what happens is Bork, and I will say this, it was clear he was going to lose. He demanded a floor vote, because usually what happens when you know you're going to lose is they just say, withdraw, go away. He said, I want a floor vote. I want everybody on the record. And to President Reagan's credit, even though it would be a loss for the White House, he granted Bork's wish. He got the floor vote, which he lost. Then they appointed a Harvard law professor, second try, and he lied about having smoked marijuana. He said, I had smoked it, but it was a long time ago. And then it's like, I forgot, a student or somebody, or a law clerk or somebody said, I smoked out with him last week. And so he had to go. And then they nominated Anthony Kennedy, another Republican appointee who turned out to be a disappointment with us sometimes, but against us many other times. Yeah,
100%. Well, man, so much to say. I promised out at the top of the hour. I do want to mention before I say goodbye and thank you, Michael. I'm really excited about this summit. This is the last time I get to say it, that thousands of people are signing up. We've got speakers from 7 different countries. The legal, the journalistic, the scientific, the research, the teaching of doctors, all about the non-lethal condition called COVID-19. I say non-lethal not because no one died. No one is saying it doesn't exist, but the numbers are skewed so wildly in favor of people who are infirm and elderly with pre-existing and comorbidities that we're talking about mass viral entrancement here through media propaganda, and it's got to stop. So Pardon me, the website is restoretheculture.com, restoretheculture.com. Attorney Reiner Fulmick, Dr. Dolores Cahill from the University College Dublin, psychiatrists Mark McDonald and Dr. Aaron Cariotti, State Senator from Minnesota, you mentioned Minnesota, Scott Jensen, who's also a physician getting whacked by his state medical board for challenging the cause of death on death certificates. We just put together as many experts as we could. It's free to register. Go to restoretheculture.com and get Michael's book. It's called The Stakes, America at the Point of No Return, mom and pop bookstores or Amazon while it's still available. Mike, thank you so much for your time, sir.
Thank you.
All right. This is Livestream Hangout. I'm Patrick Coffin. Our show drops every Tuesday. This coming Tuesday, my interview with Brazilian philosopher Olavo de Carvalho. Nothing to say about the man. Awesome conversationalist and a great show. All right. God bless you. God bless America.